I normally don't really cover stuff like movies and TV shows, but this article kinda made me think about stuff. Because this is one of those stories that people are going to dismiss because it's only movies or it's only TV series, but I think that's missing the bigger picture. This isn't really about Apocalypse Now or Terminator 2. It's pretty much about what buying digital actually means in 2026. For years, we've been told that digital is the future. It's more convenient, there are no discs to store around, you instantly download stuff, and your library follows you everywhere. And for the most part, that's actually true. And yeah, I buy digital games as well. But convenience has always come with a trade-off that many people either ignore or don't fully understand. Because in most digital ecosystems, you don't actually own what you paid for. And Sony's announcement is exactly another reminder of that reality. Those weren't movies people rented. They weren't titles included in a subscription. Those were movies people actually purchased with the expectation that they could watch them whenever they wanted. And now, because a licensing agreement expired, hundreds of those purchases are simply disappearing from customers' libraries. You get no refunds, no alternative access, they're just gone. And that's the part that should concern everyone. The legal defense is obvious. It's probably buried somewhere in terms of service. And it says something along the lines like, you're purchasing a license, not permanent ownership. So companies have been writing these agreements for years, and legally, Sony is probably on solid ground. But there's a huge difference between something being legal and something being acceptable from a consumer standpoint. For example, if I walk into a store and buy a Blu-ray, nobody's showing up 5 years later to take it off my shelf just because a licensing contract expired. If I buy a book, Amazon doesn't get to remotely erase it because publisher rights changed. Well, actually, we've seen digital bookstores do similar things before, and every time it sparks the same debate. But the problem is that this isn't unique to PlayStation. Sony just happens to be the latest company reminding us how fragile digital ownership really is. Or rather, how non-existent it is, if I'm going to be completely honest. And you know what's the scary part? This could absolutely happen to games someday. People like to think Steam libraries are forever, or Epic Game Store libraries forever. Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo. Maybe they are, but maybe they aren't. The truth is rather simple. You're trusting that every licensing agreement remains intact, every publisher continues operating, every storefront says online, and every company decides it's worth maintaining your access indefinitely. However, history tells us that's a very risky assumption. We've already seen games disappear from sale because licensed music expired. We've seen racing games delisted. We've seen Activision titles disappear. We've seen entire digital storefronts shut down. Also, we've seen online-only games become completely unplayable after servers were switched off. The only difference here is that Sony isn't just preventing further sales, they are removing access from people who already paid. And that's a much more dangerous precedent. Which is why I think we need to start having a much louder conversation about digital ownership versus digital licensing. Consumers have become comfortable with the idea that their libraries exist in the cloud, but the cloud isn't yours. Those files aren't yours. That account isn't really yours. You're just borrowing access under whatever terms the platform sets. And most of the time that works perfectly, until it doesn't. And this is also why I think platforms like GOG deserve a lot more credit than they get. I'll give you an example. When you buy a game on GOG, you can download the offline installer, just like that. You can back it up on an external drive, burn it to a Blu-ray if you can or if you want. You can copy those files wherever you want. And years later, even if GOG disappeared tomorrow, you would still have those installation files. You could still play the games. And that's much closer to actual ownership. Obviously, it doesn't solve every problem. Like multiplayer games, they still rely on servers, and licensed content can still be complicated. But at least your single-player purchase isn't dependent on someone else's licensing agreement staying active forever. And honestly, when I see this BS with PlayStation and Sony, I think every digital storefront should move closer to that model. I mean, let's be real here. If I've paid for a game, I should be able to download everything necessary to install and play that game offline. I don't want to be in a situation where I need some kind of a stream permission from a server. Or perhaps hoping that my account authentication still works in 20 years. Or even better, crossing my fingers that corporate lawyers renew another contract. It can be really fucking simple. Just let me keep what I bought. But then some of you would say publishers don't want DRM-free games because piracy exists. And I could say fair enough, but we've had DRM-free games on GOG for years and the industry hasn't collapsed. Pirates were never waiting for a DRM-free storefront anyway. They've always found ways around DRM. The thing here is that the people who suffer the most are often paying customers who end up dealing with online activation limits, launcher requirements, authentication servers, and in case like this, losing access entirely. And this is extremely backwards for me because the paying customer should always have the better experience. But look, at the end of the day, I don't think this is a reason to panic and delete your Steam library tomorrow. But it is a reason to become more informed customer. For example, know what you're buying. Read that fine print when companies say purchase. Support stores and developers that respect ownership. And maybe think twice before assuming your digital library is permanent. Because today it's all about movies on PlayStation, but tomorrow it could be something else. Maybe a TV show, maybe a game, or maybe an entire storefront. I believe technology exists to preserve what people buy, and the question is whether the industry is willing to let consumers actually own their purchases, or whether buy is slowly becoming just another word for temporary access. Because if I'm being honest with you folks, if things continue in this fashion, I don't think there's going to be a good outcome for us normal consumer people. If history is telling me anything, it's going to be much, much worse. And that's basically my take on this news. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And that's it from me, until the next one.